Hello, I'm J. Jermaine Bay of Elodian Morris Pradium, Ante Colorado. The acronym is AMPAC. I'm the Chief Judge of Consular Court. Today is Class 83. Class 83. What did we learn in Class 82? Well, we're still going over the Charter of the United Nations of 1945, right? Right now we're in Chapter 5. The previous chapter is about the organization, about the General Assembly. Now we're going deeper into the Security Council, learning more about the obligations of the Security Council, right? So as the Moors know, we must always keep the proper context, right, and concept. Why are we going over the Charter? That is the question. What is the purpose of the Charter? That is the question. Why was the Charter enacted in the first place? That is the real question. And why was the Charter established? Well, Moors must always remember that the Charter of 1945 was established because it's a reincarnation of the League of Nations Covenant of 1920 that was dissolved in 1946. So now we're going backwards, right? So we got the Charter of the United Nations, and before the Charter of the United Nations, there was the League of Nations that was established in 1920 and dissolved in 1946. And the United Nations Charter was established in 1945, so they had slight overlap, right? But what organization was in place before the League of Nations? Anybody know? Well, if you do the research, you'll find out before the League of Nations, it had what? It had the Treaty of Fez, right? And the Treaty of Fez was of 1912, and it had obligations. And before the Treaty of Fez of 1912, it was basically the Act Algeciras of 1906, right? And the Act Algeciras of 1906 put together some government bodies' obligations commonly known as reforms. So now if we now go back forward, right? Come back to the future. Let's start all over. So you had the Act Algeciras of 1912. Act Algeciras of 1906, right? And from there was obligations for the Moorish government to maintain the triple principle. But the Moors were still asleep after 1906. So who comes in next? France, along with the Sultan, signs a treaty in 1912. And within that treaty, it gave France the obligation to do what it is the Moors were supposed to be doing. What type of Moors? Moroccan Moors, right? So once France took over in 1912, you must always remember after that what took place. That Spain relinquished its capitulatory regime in Morocco in 1914, which gave France an obligation now to take the municipal organization that was in Tangier, and they moved now that organization over to France, Paris, right, to establish the League of Nations in 1920. And then the League of Nations dissolved itself in 1946 once it got the United Nations Charter established in 1945. And all these are nothing but a reincarnation of the obligation of the last organization. And the only reason why the Charter of the United Nations exists today is because Moors hadn't been governing the empire. So the Charter of the United Nations serves as trustees and managers over our vast estate. So therefore, Moors must understand we have delayed our own justice and we have left it up to the colonizers, right? All of the several member states around planet Earth who have established an organized dual society through the United Nations Charter to govern the affairs of the world. But that obligation ultimately was set forth in Moroccan treaties, especially the Act Algeciras of 1906, for the Moorish government to oversee the affairs of the empire. And since we have failed to do so, the world has moved on. So you must understand, Moors, the proper concept and context of understanding the Charter of the United Nations. The Charter of the United Nations is just an extension of Moroccan law that's being governed by others other than the Moors. So now that the Moors are coming back into the competency of understanding statehood, now we can accede to our treaties and we can enforce our constitutions and get back into our rightful seats of governance, right? We're at varying stages of advancement, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and continue, get back into Class 83. As you know, we always open up with the Constitution. All the Moors will need a Constitution, right? So I want to say congratulations to all the Moors out there who are coming back into competency of understanding that they need to restore the Constitution, right? They must be in a succession a succession state, capital S state, to take over the latitude, longitude of that colonized jurisdiction that you're in at this time, right? The charter refers to as trust territories, right? So the Moors are now taking over those trust territories and restoring the states through the competencies of constitutions, right? So I want to say congratulations to all the Moors out there that now get back into trying to uplift fallen humanity in a competent way, right? Okay, let's go ahead and get into the class. Now, this is the charter, Article 26 of the Charter of the United Nations, Article 26. We left off on Article 26, so before we get into Article 27, let's just do a little recap, right? So we'll start at Article 26. This is Chapter 5, right? And then we'll go into Chapter 6. We're still talking about the Security Council. Keep that in mind, okay? All right, good brother Marcus, let's go ahead and get started.
Article 26. In order to promote the establishment and maintenance of international peace and security with the least diversion of armaments of the world's human and economic resources, the Security Council shall be responsible for formulating, with the assistance of military staff committee referred to in Article 47, plans to submit to the members of the United Nations for the establishment of systems for the regulation of armaments. Voting. Article 27. Each member of the Security Council shall have one vote. 2. Decisions of the Security Council on procedural matters shall be made by affirmative vote of 7 members. 3. Decisions of the Security Council on all other matters shall be made by an affirmative vote of 7 members, including the concurring votes of the permanent members, provided that in the decision under Chapter 6, under paragraph 3, the Article 52, a party to dispute shall abstain from voting. Procedure. Article 28. Number 1. The Security Council shall be so organized as to be able to function continuously. Each member of the Security Council shall, for this purpose, be represented at all times at the seat of the organization. 2. The Security Council shall hold periodic meetings at which each of the members may, if so desires, be represented by a member of the government or by some other specially designed representative. 3. The Security Council may hold meetings at such places other than the seat of the organization as in its judgment will best facilitate its work. Article 29. The Security Council may establish such subsidiary organs as it deems necessary for the performance of its functions. Article 30. The Security Council shall adopt its own rules of procedures, including the method of selecting its president. Article 31. Any member of the United Nations which is not a member of the Security Council may participate without vote in the discussion of any question brought before the Security Council whenever the latter considers that the interests of that member are specially affected. Article 32. Any member of the United Nations which is not a member of the Security Council or any state which is not a member of the United Nations, if it is a party to a dispute under consideration by the Security Council, shall be invited to participate without vote in the discussion relating to the dispute. The Security Council shall lay down such conditions as deems just for the participation of the state which is not a member of the United Nations.
All right, thank you, good brother. Okay, so let's go back up. All right, so we started at Article 26, right? Keep in mind we're in Chapter 5, talking about the Security Council, right? So as we start to understand about the obligations of the Security Council, right? Now keep in mind, before we got into the Security Council of Chapter 5, we first went over the organization and we talked about the General Assembly, right? So you talked about the organization, General Assembly, and now we're getting to the Security Council, all right? Now, here's what the Moors have to keep in mind. As we start to go over the charter, you have to have the proper concept and context, right? You must always remember, everything you're reading is about Moroccan law. Watch this. As you read the charter, keep in mind, they're setting up the triple principle. What is a triple principle? It's what? Sovereignty and independence, integrity of domains, and then economic liberty without any inequality. A triple principle, right? So now we open up to talk about the charter, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at this really quick. Let's recap. I'm going to go back. So when the charter establishes itself, the first thing it talks about is the purposes and principles, right? It's about human rights. And then it immediately starts to go into how do you protect the human rights. It started talking about putting together the membership of what? States. Who can be a member of the charter? Only states. Which is the first box of the triple principles about what? Sovereignty and independence is only for states. So you see they're opening up about human beings. So who can establish a state? Only human beings can establish a state, right? The Constitution is the proper written instrument that's put together, but who puts that proper written instrument together? Human beings, the nationals of the state, right? And once they do that, they establish a state, now they become a member of the charter. So the membership is only for states, right? So it gets right into membership after it talks about your human right to have statehood, right? So now you're enforcing chapter 2. You get into chapter 3. What is chapter 3 and chapter 4 all about? So chapter 3 is about organs. What is it putting together? Administration, right? That way you can govern over the affairs based upon the triple principle of your state. Your constitution says you need what? 3 branches of government, right? You need your legislative branch, your executive branch, and judicial branch. So the charter is setting up these provisions based upon the administration, right? So keep in mind, Morris, when you looked at the Treaty of Affairs of 1912, the preamble, and you go right into Article 1, what was France's obligation based upon this word called reforms? Reforms. Reforms. What was the 6 principal things that France was obligated based upon reforms? Article 1 said what? Administrative, judicial, educational, what? Economic, financial, and military reforms, right? That was Article 1. So it's setting up all these provisions of an organ. Only an organ in the General Assembly and the Security Council can start to come together as legislators. So the General Assembly and the Security Council writes bills. They adopt bills. They're the legislators, right? And they have to enforce this through their legislative branch. They also have what? An executive branch, right? So the executive branch is almost like the Security Council, right? Then you got the General Assembly that puts together bills as well, almost like a legislative branch, right? But both the executive branch and the legislative branch both come together to enact legislation. They work in harmony of each other. So they're checking the first box of sovereignty and independence is through setting up the organs, the General Assembly, and the Security Council. And then the second box of the triple principle was what? Integrity of domains. Well, who maintains the integrity of domains? The state through its legislation and enforcing it through what? Its judicial branch, right? So as we start to read more, always keep in mind, you're reading Moroccan law, A. B, what's B? B is the 6 principles are being put together through the Treaty of Affairs of 1912, in addition to the Act Algeciras of 1906, based upon the triple principle, right? So sovereignty, independence, integrity of domains, economic liberty without any inequality. Then the Treaty of Affairs of 1912 is obligated to what? Administrative, judicial, educational, economic, financial, and military reforms. All these principles are here. So as we open up with the charter, see the structure that they're putting together first. They're checking the first box of sovereignty and independence of states. Now they're starting to move into what? Integrity of domains, which is overseeing the Security Council, right? Military reforms, overseeing economics, and overseeing diplomacy. That's what the obligation is of the second box of the triple principle. How do you maintain the integrity of domains, right? So the charter acts like what? Let's talk about that really quickly, right? You must remember, what is this all about? The charter is set up in a way where it has taken the place of the Empire of Morocco as administrators. Let me give you an example. As we start to read about the Security Council, the Security Council almost acts like a sultan. So in any monarchy, the monarchy sets up what? A separate government called the Mazin, right? The Mazin is the Moorish government, the Sharifian authority, right? The Moorish government, right? So in the charter, you have these different layers of enforcement. The Security Council is almost acting like a sultan. So if you now go back and look at the Kingdom of Morocco's constitution of year 2011. If you go back and look at Great Britain's constitution, you will see that it sets up a monarchy slash parliamentary type of constitution. What does that mean? Like in Great Britain, you got a king now, right? You got King Charles. But King Charles is the monarchy. But they also have what? A prime minister overseeing the government. So therefore, when you look at the charter, you look at Great Britain, you look at the Kingdom of Morocco, you look at Kingdom of Morocco's constitution of 2011, you will see that it's set up like a monarchy. You got a king there, and that king has set aside a government to run all the affairs, almost like an organization, right? So when you take a look at the charter, you'll see the same principles in the charter. The Security Council almost acts like the Sultan, where the General Assembly members act like the government itself, like the Muslim. And then you got a judicial branch, all right? So as you're looking at the charter, keep that in mind, that the charter has taken over for the Moors, because the Moorish government was supposed to be overseeing the empire of Morocco alongside who? The Sultan. You look at the Act al-Jassers of 1906, it was supposed to be the Sultan and the Moorish government governing the empire together as a collective. A monarchy and a parliament, right? A monarchy and the Muslim. Monarchy, Sharifian government, i.e. the Moorish government, right? But the monarchy is always consistent. It's always a monarchy. Great Britain has the same thing. Great Britain has a monarchy with the king now, and then it has a parliamentary procedure with a prime minister. So when you're looking at the charter, guess what the charter is doing? It's a reincarnation of a monarchy and a government working side by side. You'll see the footprint of it as you keep reading, right? Keep that in mind. Okay, so as you know, Morris, the organs are setting up the triple principle, and from there, those organs start to get into enforcing the next chapter, which was Security Council and the General Assembly, right? So the General Assembly is like the Muslim. That's like the Moorish government. The Security Council is acting like the Sultan that's overseeing the Muslim. They working side by side. That's why the Security Council has so much power of what commonly known as the veto. Because all monarchs have the veto power. So right now, the Security Council has the veto power, and all monarchs have a veto power. Kings, queens, sultans have veto, right? This is why they gave themselves so much power. Who? The Security Council. Because they're acting like the sultan now. Okay? Keep that in mind, right? So why am I sharing that with you? How is it that they have this much power? Because the Moors acquiesced. We've been in a shallow grave. It was our job that once the Sultan stepped down, listen to me, boys. In 1956, France was overseeing the empire on behalf of the Sultan. The Sultan stepped down and allowed France to step up through inauguration. France became what? The Sultan. Right? So when France became the Sultan, France immediately put in what? The League of Nations to act like the government, while France was overseeing it through the League of Nations. We'll talk about that. All because the Moors were asleep. It is supposed to be the Moors at this time overseeing all treaties, all conventions, and all arrangements in Morocco according to the Act al-Jassers, Article 123. But in the absence of the Moors, incompetency and being asleep, the Charter of the United Nations is acting in our place. That must be understood, Moors. So don't look down on the charter members. You must appreciate the fact that someone had to act like the successor to our estate in order to maintain the empire. There must be a successor. You ever heard the phrase, the king is dead, long live the king? What does that mean? See, the personality may transition, but the seat remains the same. Different king, same office. Queen Elizabeth steps down, who steps up? Charles, right? Prince Charles is up next to be king. So the office of the monarchy always lives on. And the Moorish Empire must always live on, and someone has to control the seat, the office, to maintain the empire at all times. That's the obligation of the treaties. Treaties require someone to oversee the empire at all times. It's because the Moors were asleep, the rest of the world moved forward to control our pen as a collective. That must be understood. Someone must be sitting in the office. The king never dies because the king is what? In office of the state. So Security Council is acting like a sultan, and the General Assembly members and the rest of the organisms are acting like the monarchy. That must be understood. So when we come back in power, we oversee all what? Treaties, conventions, and arrangement. We'll get back into conformity with the charter. Okay? We'll talk more about that in the future. Okay, so we got Security Council, Chapter 5, right? So we're getting through Article 26. This is very important. In order to promote the establishment and maintenance of international peace and security with least diversion of armaments of the world's human and economic resources, right? The Security Council shall be responsible for formulating, with the assistance of the Military Staff Committee, referred to in Article 47, plans to submit it to the members of the United Nations for the establishment of a system for the regulation of armaments, right? So you see what's happening here? The Security Council is responsible for what? The military, you can see that's very clear. They're responsible for what? Economics, we saw the word economics, right? Social, etc. The Security Council is overseeing all the obligations the Moors were supposed to oversee. Okay? Now, let me share something with the Moors. The Charter of the United Nations, and its permanent Security Council members, got 5, right? But how many members total is it at the Security Council? 15, right? Total 15. And these 5 right here have the veto power, almost like a sultan, right? They've given themselves this power, right? Now, the Security Council, like I said, is acting like a sultan. So you got, this is the website of the United Nations, okay? United Nations Security Council, this is their website. You can see the current members. Right now it's current, 2022. We're in December 2022 at this time. It says the council is composed of 15 members. 5 permanent members, China, France, Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States, even though it should say United States of America, and 10 non-permanent members elected for 2 years by the General Assembly within a term year. Okay, so it lists all these states, okay? So here's the additional 10, okay? Albania, Brazil, Gabon, Ghana, India, Ireland, Kenya, Mexico, Norway, United Arab Emirates, right? So you can see their term ends, Albania, Brazil, Gabon, and Ghana, their term ends in 2023. India's term ends in 2022. So India, Ireland, Kenya, Mexico, and Norway, United Arab, or should I say Norway, 2022, and United Arab Emirates ends in 2023, okay? So they all have a term limit, okay? So these are the current states as of today, okay? They help to govern on behalf of similar to like being a sultan, right? So these non-permanent members get non-permanent status as a sultan, and the 5 Security Council members have what you call so-called permanent sultan status. You must understand why I'm using these words. It makes sense to you as we keep studying. Okay? They've taken the place of the Moorish government that used to be ran by a monarchy and the Moorish government as a collective. Okay? So, as we know already in the Act of Algeciras, the Act of Algeciras set forth a lot of reforms, right? Let's look up the definition of reforms. Your brother, can you read the definition of reform?
Yes, sir. Reform, verb, reforms, third person present. 1, make changes in something, typically a social, political, or economic institution or practice, in order to improve it. An opportunity to reform and restructure an antiquated schooling model. 2, chemistry. Subject, hydrocarbons, to a catalytic process in which straight chain molecules are converted to branched forms for the use of gas and for the use in gasoline. Noun, reforms, plural noun. 1, the action or process of reforming an institution or practice. The reform of the divorce laws, economic reforms.
All right, so reforms is about making correction, right? Improving something, right? Looking at something antiquated and making it more modern, right? Improving it, right? That's reforms, okay? So as we're starting to learn more, the Act of Algeciras and the Treaty of Fez set forth reforms. Okay, Morris, so as we're starting to understand about reforms, what is reforms all about? All treaties are set forth reforms to change something, right? For every action, there's a reaction. That's what law is all about, right? For every action, there's a reaction. So you get into your treaties, and your treaties become a reaction, right? So as we know, the 1906 Act of Algeciras was a reaction of the Sultan wanting to reign in the order, right? Because the colonial states was taking over everything, and the Moorish Empire was starting to spiral. And the Sultan realized that he was losing his grip on the empire. So you ever ask yourself, why would he put the Moorish government as the Moslem in this treaty if in fact the Moors have been subjugated? Why would he place the word Moorish in this treaty 43 times? It's because the Sultan realized he needed the Moors in order to hold on to the empire. He needed the Moors' help. Because the colonies were taken over. The Sultan was taking loans from Great Britain and Spain and France. He knew it was just a matter of time before the colonists took over the pen of the empire. So therefore, the Sultan had enough sense to put the Moors back into the treaty. The Act of Algeciras of 1906 is an addendum to the Treaty of Madrid of 1880. The Treaty of Madrid of 1880 protected the Moors based upon the addendum back to the Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1836. When you fast forward back up, the Sultan now is putting the Moors back into their proper status because this is the last living will that the Moors had based upon power. The Act of Algeciras is a living will. And that living will has additional addendums that tie back to this particular treaty. And this treaty is all about reforms, right? Okay, let's look at the word reforms. Okay, so the first time we see the word reforms is in the preamble, right? So what is it that the Sultan wanted to happen? The Sultan wanted the Moors and the Sultan come back together to reign in the order. The Sultan wasn't doing this by himself. He needed the Moors to help him, but the Moors were asleep. But he still enacted a will, a living will, for the Moors to come back into power. Okay? So the first time we see the word reforms is in the preamble of the Act of Algeciras. Good brother, can we read that, please?
Inspired by the interest of attaching itself to the reign of order, peace, and prosperity in Morocco, and recognizing that the attainment thereof can only be effected by means of the introduction of the reforms based upon the triple principle of the sovereignty and independence of His Majesty the Sultan, the integrity of his domains, and economic liberty without any inequality, have resolved upon the invitation of His Sharif and Majesty to call together a conference of Algeciras for the purpose of arriving at an understanding upon the said reforms, as well as examining the means for obtaining the resources necessary for their application.
So you can see more reforms. This treaty in its 7 chapters was all about a mandate to reform things that were antiquated, to bring it now back into a modern status. And the Sultan needed the Moors to assist him because the empire was slipping. Okay? So the Sultan puts in reforms. The reforms are for what? It's about examining the means for obtaining the resources necessary for their application. What application? Application of reforms. So what are we doing at this time through AMPAC study session? We're examining the Charter of the United Nations. We're examining our previous treaties. We're examining what are the obligations that the Moorish government was supposed to enforce in Morocco. Because we as Moors had an obligation to set forth reforms, and nobody was doing it between 1906 and 1912. So France comes in to assist the Sultan because the Moors wasn't doing it. The Moorish name is listed all throughout this treaty. The Moors wasn't doing it. Sultan brings in France to have backup. France starts to enact these reforms. Right? Where's the word reform? Okay, so reform is listed here 3 times. Let's go down to the next time. Okay. So the next time the word reform is mentioned, it's in the additional protocols. Okay? Additional protocols of the Act Outstairs of 1906. All right, so we see the word reforms, right? Let's take it from the top. Your brother can read from taking into.
Taking into account the declaration of the delegates of Morocco that they were not, for the present, in position to affix their signatures thereto, they began unable, owing to the distance, to receive an early reply from His Sharif and Majesty concerning the points in regard to which they deemed it their duty to refer to him. Reciprocally engaged by virtue of the respective full powers to unite their efforts towards the ratification of said General Act in its entirety by His Sharif and Majesty and towards the simultaneous enforcement of the reforms therein provided, which are interdependent. They therefore agree to change His Excellency, They therefore agree to charge His Excellency, Mr. Malmoussi, Minister of Italy to the Morocco and Dean of the Diplomatic Corps at Tangier, to take the necessary steps to change end by calling the attention of His Majesty the Sultan to the great advantages that his empire would derive from the stipulations adopted at the conference by the unanimous action of the signatory powers.
All right, thank you, good brother. So as you can see, the reforms were all about his empire. Whose empire? The Sultan. But the Sultan needed the Moors to assist him. This is 1906. Then they bring in France in 1912. And France is helping the empire from 1912 up in 1956. Right? So it's all about reforms. So what does France do next? Okay, so France takes over after the Act Outstairs comes out. I'm going over this for a reason, more. Be patient with me. In 1912, France takes over, right? Because who? Moors wasn't doing their job with the pen, right? I'm building you up, Moors, because Moors will look at the United Nations Charter and say, I don't want to have nothing to do with that. Well, you say that because you don't know the law and you don't know the history that the charter is based in Moroccan law because the Moors had failed to enforce their own Moroccan treaties. So someone else was doing it in our absence. I'm building you up. So in 1912, the Treaty of Fez is enacted, right? So we all know that France's job was to now act like Moors, right? So watch this. So it says right here, okay, brother, can't read the preamble. We're going to go through this again. Be patient, more. Listen.
Signed at Fez on March 30, 1912, the government of the French Republic and the government of His Sharif and Majesty, desirous of inaugurating a regular regime in Morocco based upon internal order and general security, which will make it possible to introduce reforms and to ensure the economic development of the country, have agreed upon the following.
So you see, this is the mandate in the preamble. The Moors were supposed to be doing this. So the Sultan brings in France to do what? Institute what? Reforms. What's the reforms about? Fixing things that were antiquated to bring it up into a modern society, right?
Article 1. The government of the French Republic and His Majesty the Sultan have agreed to establish in Morocco a new regime comprising the administrative, judicial, educational, economic, financial, and military reforms which the French government may see fit to introduce within the Moroccan territory.
Right, so these are basic principles of the reforms to fix these core 6 principles, right? On behalf of what? The empire. But France was doing the job on behalf of Moors, right? Listen, here, brother.
This regime shall safeguard the religious status, the respect and traditional prestige of the Sultan, the exercise of the Mohammedan religion and the religious institutions, in particular those of the Habus, It shall include the organization of the Reformed Sharifin Moxen.
Did you catch it? Listen closely, Moses. Article 1. This regime shall safeguard the religious status, the respect and traditional prestige of the Sultan. Who's the Sultan? Security Council. The exercise of the Mohammedan religion and of all religious institutions, in particular those of the Habus, right? Because you're talking about Habus properties. It shall, listen, it shall include the organization of a reformed Sharifian Moxen. That's the General Assembly. So the Security Council members are acting like a traditional sultan. And the General Assembly is acting like the organization, i.e. of the Sharifian Moxen. And who's the Sharifian Moxen? The Moorish government. You see how the United Nations Charter is implementing these things? Okay, let's continue, good brother, right here.
The government of the Republic will come to an understanding with the Spanish government regarding the interests which this government derives from its geographical position and territorial possessions on the Moroccan coast. In like manner, the city of Tangier shall retain its recognized distinctive characteristic, which will determine its municipal organization.
Okay, so where was the original Charter of the United Nations located?
Tangier.
Tangier, right? Where was Tangier? In Morocco, right? So right now it's the Kingdom of Morocco. So it's right at the tip of it, right? As you enter into the mouth, right? The Mediterranean Sea, right? So that's where Tangier was located. That's where the original United Nations organization was located. So now France recognizes that Spain dissolved it in 1914, and France says, okay, if that's not the organization no more, municipal organization, France turns around and moves it to
Paris.
Paris, France, right? To set up what? The League of Nations. Okay, let's keep reading, and then I'm going to show you something else. Article 2.
Article 2. His Majesty the Sultan agrees that henceforth the French government, subject to prior notification to the Moxen, may proceed to such military occupation of the Moroccan territory as it may deem necessary for the maintenance of good order and the security of commercial transactions, and may exercise every police supervision on land and within the Moroccan waters.
See, the Security Council's obligation to do exactly this, to maintain diplomacy, to maintain sanctions based upon economics, and maintain military reforms. That's the Security Council, right? And the Moxen is the General Assembly. Can you see the footprint thus far? Okay. All right, so let me show you something, boys. Once Tangier was dissolved in 1914, it was moved now to Paris, France. France had the obligation to maintain these principles and reforms. So France sets up a League of Nations and invites all these states in, right? Keep in mind, 63 states were members of the League of Nations, okay? Let's read a couple of articles so y'all can start seeing the correlations from the League of Nations to now the United Nations Charter. But you'll also see the correlations of the League of Nations going back to what? The Act of Algeciras and the Treaty of Fez of 1912, okay? Your brother, preamble, or the title of the preamble?
The Convent of the League of Nations. The high contracting parties, in order to promote international cooperation and to achieve international peace and security by the acceptance of obligations not to resort to war, by the prescription of open, just, and honorable relations between nations, by the firm establishment of the understandings of international law as the actual rule of conduct among governments, and by the maintenance of justice and a scrupulous respect for all treaty obligations in the dealings of organized peoples with one another, agree to this Convent of the League of Nations.
All right, so the preamble is all about maintaining peace and security. On behalf of what? Treaties and people. Isn't it very similar to the United Nations preamble? Right? Okay, so let's get into Article 1. We're going to read Article 1, 2, and 3, and we'll jump down to 8, okay? We're going to learn something today. Okay, more. So we're going to get into these articles, okay? Like I said, Article 1, 2, 3, and 8, what we'll read today. I would highly encourage all the Moors to go back and read the League of Nations, right? I think it has about 117 articles, It's good information, that way you see how they transfer that information into United Nations Charter, okay? So, Article 1.
Article 1, the original members of the League of Nations shall be those of the signatories which are named in the annex to this covenant, and also such of those other states named in the annex as shall accede without reservation to the covenant. Such accession shall be effected by a declaration deposited with the Secretariat within 2 months of coming into force of the covenant. Notice thereof shall be sent to all other members of the League. Any fully self-governing state, dominion, or colony not named in the annex may become a member of the League if its admission is agreed to by 2/3 of the Assembly, provided that it shall give effective guarantees of its sincere intentions to observe its international obligations, and shall accept the regulations as may be prescribed by the League in regard to its military, naval, and air forces and armaments. Any member of the League may, after 2 years' notice of its intention so to do, withdraw from the League, provided that all of its international obligations and all of its obligations under the covenant shall have been fulfilled at the time of its withdrawal.
All right, thank you, Brother Mark. So in Article 1, one of the things I highlighted is the United Nations changed some of the reforms. Right now, if you want to become a member of the United Nations, they say the Security Council has to now bring you in and agree, right? But the League of Nations of 1920 said what? Any fully self-governing state, dominion, or colony not named in the annex may become a member of the League if its admission is agreed to by 2/3 of the Assembly. So who's the Assembly? That's the General Assembly, right? But now the 5 Security Council members, right, have changed to say, nah, Security Council wants to say who can come in and who can't. But the League of Nations said it's just simply 2/3 vote of the General Assembly. So you see what the 5 permanent Security Council members have done? They've given themselves some extra power to say who comes in and who doesn't. But back in the day, 1920, the General Assembly said just 2/3 vote. Now only 5 states get to determine whether you come in as a member state or not. These type of things have to be reformed by the Lord. We'll talk about that. Okay, let's go to Article 2.
Article 2. The action of the League under the covenant shall be effected through the instrumentality of an assembly and of a council with a permanent secretariat.
Okay, so Article 2. The action of the League under this covenant shall be effected through the instrumentality of an assembly and of a council with a permanent secretariat. So right here, this is the General Assembly, and then you've got the Security Council. Now remember, United Nations opened up, it talked about the General Assembly first, and then it went into Chapter 5, Security Council. Right? It's the League of Nations we're talking about right now. So you can see already some of the footprints, similarities, right? Some of the correlations. Then it says a permanent secretariat. But now they've changed that word permanent and said permanent council. You see how they're moving words around? The 5 Security Council members have given themselves a lot of power now that the League of Nations covenant has been dissolved. Okay? They're acting like a soldier. Okay, Article 3.
Article 3. The assembly shall consist of representatives of the members of the League. The assembly shall meet at stated intervals and from time to time as occasions may require at the seat of the League or at such other places may be decided upon. The assembly may deal at its meetings with any matter within the sphere of action of the League or affecting the peace of the world. At meetings of the assembly, each member of the League shall have 1 vote and may not have more than 3 representatives.
Okay, so Article 3, the assembly shall, so what? The General Assembly, right, shall consist of representatives of the members of the League. The Assembly, General Assembly, shall meet at stated intervals and from time to time as occasion may require the seat of the League or at such other place as may be decided upon. The General Assembly may deal at its meetings with any matter within the sphere of action of the League of affecting the peace of the world. At meetings of the General Assembly, each member of the League shall have one vote and may not have more than 3 representatives. So at one time, it was really the General Assembly that was dealing with the peace of the world. But now the Security Council has taken a lot of that power away from the General Assembly and put it in the hands of the 5 permanent Security Council members. But at one time, all the member states of the League of Nations were voting as a collective, as an organized dual society with simply 2/3 vote. You see, so you can see what's happening here, okay? Let's jump down to Article 8, which tells you a lot about why the Security Council members have taken on a lot of power and put it in their own hands, okay? Article 8, good brother.
Article 8. The members of the League recognize that the maintenance of peace requires the reduction of national armaments to its lowest point consistent with national safety and the enforcement by common action of international obligations. The Council, taking account of geographical situation and circumstances of each state, should formulate plans for such reduction for the consideration and action of the several governments. Such plans shall be subject to reconsideration and revision at least every 10 years. After these plans shall have been adopted by the several governments, the limits of armaments therein fixed shall not be exceeded without the concurrence of the Council. The members of the League agree that the manufacture by the private enterprise of munitions and implements of war is open to grave objections. The Council shall advise how the evil effects attendant upon such manufacture can be prevented, due regard being had to the necessities of those members of the League which are not able to manufacture the munitions and implements of war necessary for their safety. The members of the League undertake to interchange full and frank information as to the scale of their armaments, their military, naval, and air programs, and the conditions of such of their industries are as adaptable to warlike purposes.
All right. So Article 8, you really have to pay attention. What's happening here? Okay, let's go back to the charter real quick. As a refresher, right? So we're talking about Article 8 of the League of Nations. So now we got to go back over to the charter. And the charter is talking about the responsibility of the Security Council. And the Security Council, according to Article 26, etc., and our other articles, in order to promote the establishment and maintenance of international peace and security with the least diversion for armaments of the world's human and economic resources. What's happening? This is about what? Demilitarization, right? So the Security Council, and who's the Security Council right now? These 5. But these are the main 5 permanent Security Council members who are always talking about war. They're always selling ammunition, right? Weapons of mass destruction. They have what? Nuclear weapons, right? But according to the League of Nations was originally set up to do what? Let's go back to it. The League of Nations had an obligation to demilitarize, right? But before the League of Nations was established to talk about demilitarization, where did they get these provisions from? Okay, let's go back to Treaty of Fez. Treaty of Fez, 1912. So Treaty of Fez, 1912, Article 2. His Majesty the Sultan agrees that henceforth the French government, subject to prior notification to the Mahdian, may proceed to such military occupation of the Moroccan territory as it may deem necessary for the maintenance of good order and the security of commercial transactions, and may exercise every police supervision on land and within the Moroccan waters. So you're overseeing the military and overseeing police, right? But now we go back up. Article 1. France was responsible for what? Military reforms. So when you go to the League of Nations, it's talking about military reforms. Okay? So it's Treaty of Fez, 1912. But let's go backwards, 1906. Listen to me, Morris. Keep up with me. This is 1906 Act of Algeciras, right? Act of Algeciras. So in the Act of Algeciras, now we go over to Article 27. The Moors had a responsibility to do what? According to our reforms. Article 27. The sale of arms condemned by the Moorish government shall be prohibited throughout the Sharifian Empire. Right? So this is what? Chapter 2, Article 27. It was the Moors' responsibility to oversee all what? Disarmament, armament, right? Demilitarization in Morocco. That was our responsibility. So now France has the obligation, and the Treaty of Fez, they're overseeing military reforms because the Moors are not doing it. And then when the Treaty of Fez, as the France establishes the League of Nations, now you got Article 8 of the League of Nations. And what does it say? It's doing a job for the Moors to do what? Demilitarize. Listen, Article 8. The members of the League recognize that the maintenance of peace requires the reduction of national armaments to the lowest point consistent. How do you get it to the lowest point? You make weapons prohibited. Go back to your treaty, Morris. Article 27 of Chapter 2. The sale of arms condemned by the Moorish government shall be prohibited throughout the Sharifian Empire. It was our job to prohibit arms, the sale of arms, the import of arms, the export of arms. That was our job. The Moors actually could have prevented World War I and World War II. This treaty came out in 1906. World War I started in 1914? You got to understand, what is the obligations of treaties, Moors? It was for the Moors to come in and bring back peace, disarmament. It was our job to maintain peace on planet Earth by doing what? Look what France put in writing as Moroccan law. This is Moroccan law you're looking at. The League of Nations was France writing Moroccan law in the absence of Moors. He's writing Moroccan law because the Sultan stepped down and let France step up in inauguration to hold an office to act like a Sultan on behalf of the Moorish government. So everything that France is doing is Moroccan law. So this was Moroccan law, Article 8. This is what the Moors should have been writing in legislation. Listen, Article 8. The members of the League recognize the maintenance of peace requires the reduction of national armaments to the lowest point consistent with national safety and the enforcement by common action of international obligations. What was the international obligations? Treaty. The Council, Security Council, taking account of the geographical situation and circumstances of each state, shall formulate plans for such reduction for the consideration and action of the several governments. Such plans shall be subject to reconsideration and revision at least every 10 years. Every 10 years, they're supposed to be looking at every state's arms. Everybody's going to go through an audit. What arms do you have based upon arms of war versus arms of sport? That's what Chapter 2 talks about in the Act of Algeciras. Where's your inventory list? Let's check it every 10 years to make sure you're not preparing for war. See, this is about an inventory. To make sure no state becomes a belligerent because they have an overstock of weapons. To make sure they're not putting together a nuclear weapon. To make sure they're not building an army so big that it looks like they're about to go and now engage in affecting someone else's sovereign integrity. This was the Moors' responsibility, but France is enacting these articles. You got to pay attention to what's happening. Okay, let's start this sentence here. Such plans shall be subject to reconsideration and revision at least every 10 years. After these plans shall have been adopted by the several governments, right? So all the states have to enact these plans to do what? Minimize their stockpiles of weapons. Why? because that's what the treaty says. Continuing. Start right here. After these plans shall have been adopted by the several governments, the limits of armaments therein fixed shall not be exceeded without the concurrence of the council. See, the states could not. Listen. Let's start all over. After these plans shall have been adopted by the several governments, the several states on planet Earth, the limits of armaments therein fixed shall not be exceeded without the concurrence of the council. These are reforms to stop what? War. What did they tell you in the beginning? How do you now bring peace back on planet Earth? The only way to do that, to get maintenance of peace, requires the reduction of national armaments to the lowest point consistent just to simply maintain your basic defense of your state. It's continuing. The members of the League agree that the manufacture by the private enterprise of munitions and implements of war is open to grave objections. Objections of war. What type of war? Weapons of mass destruction. A war machine is objected. Are y'all seeing now why the United States did not become a full member to the League of Nations? Even though the United States was a part of this at first, drafting, etc., their name is literally in here, the League of Nations, but they never signed on to it because they wasn't serious about these articles. See, they was going to enforce these articles on the smaller states, but the large states was going to keep their ammunition. How is it that the large states, such as the United States of America, was going to hold on to it despite the articles? It's because the Moors was not enforcing international law and the treaties. It was the Moors' obligation to maintain the maintenance of peace on planet Earth. Let's continue. The Council, Security Council, shall advise how the evil effects attendant upon such manufacture can be prevented, due regard being had to the necessities of those members of the League which are not able to manufacture the munitions and implements of war necessary for their safety. The members of the League undertake to interchange full and frank information as to the scale of their armaments, their military, naval, and air programs, and the condition of such of their industries as are adaptable to warlike purposes. So Article 8 is a provision that reduces people's war machine. And this is what France and the League of Nations, 63 states, came up with. This is 1920. But let's take a look at the permanent security members right now. All of them have stockpiles of weapons. They got enough nuclear arms to blow up the earth, they say, 10 times. They continue to increase weapons of war. They got drones, all kinds of missiles. Now they're making what? Robots, artificial intelligent robots to go fight the wars now. They're doing everything opposite of what the Moorish treaties were supposed to maintain. This is why they reserve upon themselves the veto power. Because see, if Russia decides to invade a state, and the United Nations comes together and says, hey, you need to stop that. Guess what Russia does? They veto any resolution that says they're supposed to stop. When the Security Council members, all of them came together, they said, yeah, you got to stop that war, or we're going to bring in the United Nations peacekeepers to deal with you, Russia. In order to be able to enact the United Nations peacekeeper, which is the army conglomerate of all the states coming together to now establish one army, guess what Russia said? Nah, you can't go to war with me, because they vetoed the ability for the United Nations to come in and remove Russia from invading another state. So all of them are controlling the narrative of war, which is the polar opposite of Article 8. Is the polar opposite of Article 27 of the Act of Observance, which is Chapter 2 that the Moors, and since the United Nations is taking the place of the Moors, and the League of Nations was taking the place of the Moors, and France was taking the place of the Moors in 1912, they were supposed to do what? The sale of arms condemned by the Moorish government shall be prohibited throughout the streets of the empire. They're supposed to be reducing the stockpile of weapons. Instead, they've increased it. This is why Moors need to come back into the competency of government. Because we delayed our own justice, A, and B, we've delayed the justice of planet Earth, of other states that have been in constant perpetual wars dealing with what? The United Nations Permanent Security Council members, as well as other states that have been a belligerent, right? So as we keep talking about the charter more, let's go back to the charter real quick. Keep it germane, right? We read over now chapter 5, right? We've gone through chapter 5, Security Council, to talk about Security Council. I'm not going to go deep into it. We'll get back to it. But what should be the basic mindset as we keep moving forward to talk about chapter 5 and chapter 6? It's about reforms, right? What is the Moors' responsibility ultimately with their treaties? Our job is to take things that are antiquated and move it now back into something modern to help with the cares of the world. Right? That's our job through the treaties to enact reforms. This is what France was trying to do. But then France failed, and next thing you know, World War I starts, and then World War II. Because it's about disarmament, and nobody likes to disarm. But France didn't have the true power they needed to disarm. Don't get me wrong, France was doing a lot of things that benefited them. They were acting like a belligerent as well. But what's really going on? Let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at a timeline, Moors. We have to see the history because a lot of Moors think the Charter of the United Nations has nothing to do with them. And that's a falsehood. The Charter of the United Nations is in place because someone's got to sit in the office of the Empire of Morocco. And since Moors haven't done it, the Charter's taken the place of it. And before the Charter, it was the League of Nations. Before the League of Nations, it was the Treaty of Fez of 1912. Before the Treaty of Fez of 1912, it was the diplomatic body at Tangier in 1906. Because the Moors haven't been doing their job. Listen, here's a timeline. I'll read through it. A timeline of Moroccan law. These are about amendments and addendums to the Master Moroccan Contract. This is contract law. AMPAC study session is about contract law, the principles of contract law. How do you enforce contract? Well, you got to understand the law and history because for every action, there's a reaction. So let's read the action and reaction, okay? Okay, number 1. The bilateral Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1786 that was fully ratified in 1787 is about the Master Moroccan Contract. That's the master agreement. Everything started with that treaty as it relates to the United States of America and all other states on planet Earth. Number 2, the bilateral Treaty of Peace and Friendship, 1836, which was what? An amendment, an extension, i.e. of a lease renewal. What was changed in the 1836 treaty? Article 25, right? Well, it was no longer a 50-year contract. Now it went basically into a perpetual annual renewal until the Moors or the United States of America petitions to abandon it. So after 1836, 50 years went by, now you're in 1886. Every year after 1886, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship has been basically an annual perpetual renewal until someone petitions to abandon it. Okay? Listen, number 3, the Multilateral Convention at Madrid, 1880, which is what? An addendum regarding the right of protections for subjects, protégés, and the oversight of deeds and tax revenue collections into Alia. All these are Moors treaties building up to protect who? Moors. If you go back and look at the treaties, all about protecting subjects. Okay? Listen. Number 4. The Multilateral Convention for the Act of Algeciras of 1906. About what? An addendum regarding the triple principle and reforms. Number 5, the bilateral treaty of Fez of 1912 was what? An addendum to inaugurate France as the Security Council reformer and enforcer of Article 123 of the Act of Algeciras inter alia. So France now is doing the job for the Moors. Number 6, the French Protectorate Diplomatic Relations and Consular Relations Correspondence of 1913. So as the Moors know, in 1913, France starts to now contact all of the signatory powers of the treaties to let them know there's a new sheriff in town. The Moors ain't doing their job. The Sultan is now brought in France. France in 1913 starts to through their diplomatic correspondence, they're sending all the signatory powers of the treaties to let them know that France is taking over to maintain the Treaty of Fez of 1912 and Article 1 to talk about the 6 elements, right? And what were the 6 elements? Administrative, judicial, educational, economic, financial, military reforms. So France is reaching out to the United States in 1913 saying, yeah, we'll take it from here, and we also can protect those Moors. What type of Moors? Moroccan subjects, right? So number 7, the municipal organization, okay? So the municipal organization, i.e. the diplomatic body at Tangier, was dissolved in 1914 when Spain relinquished its capitulation regime in Morocco, all right? So you look at now the Treaty of Fez of 1912, it talks about what? Tangier. Tangier was the organization that dissolved itself in 1914. It was the organization, right? So once it dissolved itself, the diplomatic body now moved to where? It moved where? Let's read it. Number 8, the Tangier organization was being transferred to Paris in 1920 by France to institute reforms through the Covenant of the League of Nations organization. So the League of Nations organization replaced what? Tangier's organization. But this is all Moroccan law. On behalf of Moors that are asleep, someone's controlling our pen all these decades. Okay, next. So number 9, the League of Nations organization of 1920 was dissolved in 1946, and its assignments and principles were transferred to the Charter of the United Nations organization. So now the charter's taken over for the League of Nations. Okay, listen. Number 10, the Charter of the United Nations organization of 1945 is a reincarnation of the diplomatic body at Tangier in Morocco. So therefore, the United Nations Charter is a reincarnation of the diplomatic body that was at Tangier, and the United Nations Charter is a reincarnation of the League of Nations. All because the Moors had established their own organization to enforce Moroccan law. Listen, number 11. The Security Council members have taken the place of the monarch of the Sultan, and the General Assembly members of the United Nations have taken the place of the Muezzin, which is the Moorish government, since 1912. So after 1912, the Sultan now has stepped down and allowed France and all the allied powers to take over the Moorish Empire and the Moorish pen. After 1912, they stopped waiting on the Moors. So everything was the organization in Tangier, and then the organization of Tangier transferred to the League of Nations in 1920 that France was overseeing. Then the League of Nations dissolves and the pen transfers over to the United Nations of 1945, all with the Moroccan pen, the precious, the Excalibur. Let's read number 11 again. The United Nations Security Council members have taken the place of the monarch of the Sultan, and the General Assembly members have taken the place of the Muezzin, which is the Moorish government, since 1912. Number 12, however, the restored constitution for the competent Central Moorish government of the United States of Morocco, I'll say it again, this is however, now we're coming back into power. Now we're going to speed up to the year 2021. AMPAC established its constitution on February 28, 2021. All right? We signed our constitution, which represents what? What does February 28th represent? Say it again.
Last day of Black History Month.
That's right. See, AMPAC put an end to Black history. When we signed our Constitution on February 28th of 2021, we put an end to Black history and did what? Restored Moorish history. That must be understood why we did it on that day. But in order to restore the Moorish Empire, we had to enact the Constitution. We had to then learn how to ratify, deposit, and promulgate it in accordance to international law. And what is international law? The Charter of the United Nations, Article 102. But the Charter of the United Nations is based on what? Moroccan law. All we're doing is doing what? We're going what? Full circle. So our Constitution brought it full circle back to the United Nations because the United Nations Charter was already acting like what? The Moorish government. So we're restoring our sovereignty and independence. We're restoring our integrity of domain. Then we're going to restore our economic liberty without any inequality. Where? In Morocco, to enforce the reforms. We're reforming ourselves. Listen. Number 12. However, the restored Constitution for the competent central Moorish government of the United States of Morocco, listen, and its 50 harmonized interdependent Moorish states should be the true successor, grantor, and de jure sovereign state of the Moorish Empire in correlation with the substantive provisions of the Moroccan treaties. Let's go back. Number 12 is about restoring the nation. With all the Moors restored their constitutions, then we have to do what? We have to open the session back up of the central government of the empire. We have to establish one state called the United States of Morocco. And the United States of Morocco's constitution will govern all the harmonized, interdependent Moorish states in Morocco. And through the Constitution of the United States of Morocco, we can start to govern and oversee the seat that the United Nations Charter is sitting in at this time, to assist them as a municipal organization to help the world cure itself. Listen, number 12. However, the restored Constitution for the competent central Moorish government of the United States of Morocco, when we reestablish the Constitution, and its 50 plus harmonized interdependent Moorish states should be the true successor, grantor, and de jure sovereign state of the Moorish Empire in correlation with the substantive provisions of the Moroccan treaties. Number 13. Ultimately, the Aboriginal Moroccan Moors are bound by treaty obligations to institute reforms throughout the Empire of Morocco regarding administrative, judicial, education, economics, social, financial, and military reforms as expressed in the spirit of the Treaty of Fez and expressed in the absolute provisional measures of the Act Algeciras inter alia. Why do I say that in section 13? You got to understand what treaties are all about, Moors. Treaties are not for Moors to get out of speeding tickets and tell the IRS to kick rocks. Treaties was designed for Moors to institute reforms on a global level, to demilitarize, to now bring back peace. And how do you bring back peace? You have to reduce arms of planet Earth. Our treaties are not simply for Moors to get rich. Our treaties for us to enrich planet Earth by assisting all states. That's what your treaty powers are for. That's the obligation of Moors through the will of the Act Algeciras and all other Moorish treaties. It's our job to bring Excalibur and help other states. Listen, Number 13, ultimately, why are we establishing the Constitution of the United States of Morocco? Here's why. Number 13, ultimately, the Aboriginal Moroccan Moors are bound by treaty obligations to institute reforms throughout the Empire of Morocco regarding administrative, judicial, education, economic, social, financial, and military reforms, as expressed in the spirit of the Treaty of Fez and expressed in the absolute provisional measures of the Acta Algeciras inter alia. Number 14, Moors are bound by treaty obligations to assure that the integrity of domains for all peace-loving states and their nationals of both large and small states on planet Earth is protected from predatory states and from predatory international organizations. I'll read it again. What do we do with our pen and our treaties? What's the major obligation? We got to get back and enforce the treaty obligations. Listen, number 14, Moors are bound by treaty obligations to assure that the integrity of domains for all peace-loving states and their nationals of both large and small states on planet Earth is protected from predator states and from predator international organizations. That was our job. That's what the Acta Algeciras with its 123 articles is all about. This is what France was trying to establish through the League of Nations. This is what the United Nations Charter of 1945 is supposed to establish as well. On behalf of who? Moroccans, Moors who are asleep. But unfortunately, the 5 Permanent Security Council members as well as other states are doing what? They're taking advantage of our pen. They're not acting like peace-loving states. So it's the Moors' obligation through the treaties to assist other peace-loving states. Against who? We must protect ourselves and we must protect other states from what? Predators. Predator states. And what? And from other predator international organizations, such as the United States International Organization, that's a war machine. Listen, number 15. Number 15, how can Moors assist with the upliftment of fallen humanity? That's the question. First, we have to love instead of hate. Second, we have to unite and work together as an organized dual society. Third, we have to treat people the way we want to be treated. Fourth, we have to enact legislation and serve our orders, judgments, and advisory opinions through the competent consular court. Because by that way, and that way only, can our Moroccan laws be enforced against any foreigners in Morocco. Fifth, we must assist the 188 plus member states of the United Nations with reforms that omit the veto power, inter alia, from the so-called Permanent Security Council members. Whereas 9 votes between 15 Security Council member states should serve as fair and equitable. So that demilitarization and colonization can be carried out for the good of the people around planet Earth. You see, once we recognize ourselves and our obligations to self is to get back into peace. It's love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Once we recognize ourselves and then understand the obligations of treaties, our treaties were supposed to be the Knights Templars. We were supposed to be the custodials of planet Earth. It was our job to come in and assist fallen humanity. But we failed, and so did the rest of the world. Now we must rise back up. How do you think we ended up picking cotton? You know why we ended up picking cotton? It's because we got drunk on our power. We became a belligerent as Moors. So over a period of time, that karma caught up with us, and it put us in the cotton fields so that we can see how it feels to be subjugated. So over a period of time, we recognize that you should never subjugate anybody on planet Earth. Our people as a community knows what it is to fear power. We know what it feels to be subjugated and can't get a job, can't take care of your family, can't make ends meet, don't have decent health insurance. We have to understand the reason why we fail so far is that when we can realize what it feels like to be on your hands and knees looking up to power. This time around, we have to now correct our wrongs. The treaties are giving us a second opportunity to come back into love instead of hate. To let go of the arrogance of being the original people of planet Earth. That's an arrogant status to say, I'm original, so I get to do what I want to do. That's a falsehood. We're all here together. We got to harmonize with all people on planet Earth. We got to learn something from the fact we was in the cotton fields for a reason. We have to learn how to humble ourselves, because when we get this pen back, we should never forget the reason why we ended up in those cotton fields is because we didn't know how to govern the affairs of people in a fair and equitable way. These treaties are going to give us a lot of power, Moors. But if we don't protect planet Earth, then planet Earth is not going to protect us as a people. And that clock of destiny will happen again. Our empire will go up and it'll go down again if we don't maintain harmony through our treaties. Listen. So section 15 is about what? How do we help? Right now, the 5 so-called permanent Security Council members are holding on to the veto. That way they can maintain what? Evil on planet Earth. Isn't that what the League of Nations said? Not my words. Let's go back to it real quick. Article 8 talked about evil effects. I didn't write it. They wrote it. 63 member states of the League of Nations recognize some evil is going on. So we got to get rise back up to the highest self. That's our obligation through the pen. Let's go back. Last but not least, number 16. The cares of the world and the rock of salvation can be realized through the humanitarian pen of the compassionate Moors alongside other allied states around planet Earth. Now, you got to understand something, Moors. The reason why I took you through that exercise is to remind you, what is this pen ultimately for? We got to bring back humanitarian aid to the world. If treaty is supreme law of the land, then the world is a reflection of the power that's sitting in the seats. And right now, the planet has fallen humanity. The Moors can rise humanity back. As the Moors rise, right? They say the rise of the Moors. When the Moors rise, we rise with all ships. We're the tide coming in. And all ships can rise with us. That must be understood. Your pen is not to be a belligerent. Your pen is to be a liberator. Because we know what it feels to try to get what? Liberation from our occupation. So we got to help others on planet Earth while simultaneously helping ourselves. So as we start to close out, as we keep learning about the Security Council of chapter 5, and we start going into chapter 6, which is talking a little bit more about the judicial branch, right? How to now get in, if you get into a dispute with another state, you must petition the ICJ or petition your treaties based upon what your treaties say on how to do what? Minimize a dispute. Right? We'll get into that in chapter 6 in class number 84. So I said all that to say this. Our main objective as Moors is to assist the world with reforms. Positive reforms. I end with that. Islam.